Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome to yet another God of War video. With us having covered the main protagonist of the series, Kratos, and our first big bad of the Norse pantheon, Baldur, it only felt right to go back to where it all started, and be the one to bestow him with the Blades of Chaos, a son of Zeus and brother to Athena, Ares. So to talk about Ares, we must first go back to the original series of games, and travel back to Greece, where the Olympian gods reigned supreme, occupied by an extremely powerful pantheon, one born from their clash against the infamous Titans of old. Now, Ares is the first child of Zeus and Hera, being born shortly after the Titans were defeated by the Olympians. As expected, being a child of Zeus, Ares would be bestowed with incredible power, strength, and godhood that would rival the likes of many existing Olympians. But unlike his fellow gods, he did not revel in their kinship or brotherhood, but instead indulged in his own ambitious nature, which actually put him at odds with the pantheon. It really didn't help that Ares was a very calculated, sadistic, bitter bastard, one that embodied the very nature of the heart of battle itself. But this in turn allowed him to truly live up to his title as a god of war. Although Ares was a valued member of Olympus, there was no denying that over the centuries, his relationship with the gods and even his own family members had soured. Zeus had begun to shun him, favoring Athena, and his lust for power only grew because of this. This would slowly begin to turn the cogs of fate, so in the shadows, Ares would begin to plot the downfall of Olympus. As this went on, Zeus would learn of the prophecy of the so-called marked child that would lead to the downfall of both him and Olympus. And once Ares learnt of this, the god would actively go out of his way to seek and even sire the child, so he could control it like a weapon. And this is where his eyes would turn to the Queen of the Furies, Alecto. The Furies were a formidable force even amongst the realm of gods, having become enforcers of oaths and conquerors of the Titans. Their desirable traits caught the attention of the god, and he would go out of his way to have a very physical relationship with Alecto, hoping that the child she would sire would be the marked guardian he'd heard so much of. But instead of being gifted a warrior, granted with the powers of both Fury and God, he instead got Orcos, a measly being who lacked the markings he was looking for. Thus, he would abandon his quest to find this child, leaving Orcos to the care of Alecto, as he simply had no interest in him. While still resentful towards the pantheon, Ares maintained his facade with his brothers and sisters, plotting as time went on. Shortly following the birth of Orcos, Zeus would begin to panic as he desired to find the marked child, and his paranoia started to devolve into mania, as he even went so far to send out his kin to track down all possibilities of who this could be. And eventually, they would find success, with Athena and Ares having traveled to Sparta and finding a child called Deimos. When they recognized the unusual markings on his body, they knew that he was the child of prophecy. So Deimos would be captured and taken back to Olympus. But as they were leaving, the god of war would be attacked by the boy's younger brother, who rushed at him with a heart full of rage. Although he was swatted away like a fly, this young man's ferocity made an impression on Ares. So, throughout the years, the god would keep a very close eye on the Spartan, Kratos. So yes, this is actually the first time the two ever interact with each other. Now, following this point, we actually come on to a tie-in comic, which takes place a few decades later after Deimos had been captured. Whilst Ares would continue to sit on his plans, he entered a friendly wager of sorts amongst the gods. You see, the deities wanted to create a competition amongst gods and man, where the mortals of Greece would compete against each other for the ambrosia of Asclepius. To motivate them, a handful of villages would suffer from a great tragedy that would incentivize the strongest warriors from each village to travel out and pursue the ambrosia. So in short, they had organized a battle royale that pitted mortal against mortal that the gods would wager on. And having seen the sheer ferocity that lied within Kratos, Ares was wise to place place his bets on the Spartan because, as expected, he would be victorious. Following this point, Ares' interest in the Spartan grew exponentially as he had become a warmonger for Sparta, laying siege to all that stood in his way. But eventually, one day, the Spartan bit off more than he could chew. During one such battle, Kratos and his Spartan horde went up against the likes of an endless barbarian horde led by Ulrich. Defiant until the very end, even with all of his men dead, Kratos would call out to Ares and swear an eternal life of servitude to him if he were to annihilate the entire barbarian horde. And unable to say no to such an offer, in one full swoop, Ulrich and his legions would perish before his hands. But things were not over just yet. To mark Kratos as his servant, Ares would sear his arms with the chains tied to the blades of chaos, forever branding him as his perfect puppet. After accomplishing his goals of acquiring Kratos, he would have the Spartan travel throughout the land of Greece, killing all that stood in his way in the name of Ares. But as the god of war witnessed him, he noticed that Kratos' heart wasn't always in the fight. And it's here where Ares realized that Kratos was still tied to his family in Sparta, so to guarantee that he would become the perfect warrior, when Kratos was raiding a village, Ares had planted his family there, so that Kratos, in his blood rage, would slay the last thing tying him to his humanity. But upon the death of Calliope and Lysandra, instead of Kratos embodying this perfect warrior Ares had envisioned, he instead spiraled into a dark depression, one that ultimately had him questioning his very existence as he had now been branded with his family's ashes. Eventually, the Spartan would attempt to sever his ties to the god of war, but by doing so, he ultimately broke his oath to the god and would be attacked by the Furies. And whilst they are formidable adversaries, the ghost of Sparta just proved to be too much for them. So, with the death of Alecto and later Orcus, Ares' grasp on the Spartan was finally released. Now fully relieved of the god of war's control, Kratos would begin to plot a plan of his own to gain the favor of the gods so that maybe one day they would see him for the monster he was, and he could be tasked with killing the god of war. 10 years would pass by between the events of God of War Ascension and God of War 1, and eventually Ares would snap. Having grown tired of Olympus's politics and his constant resentment by the pantheon, the god of war would finally spring to action. No longer caring to have a ward or child to enforce the prophecy, he would take on this fate alone, laying siege to all of Greece, with his attacks starting in Athens. If he wanted to destroy Olympus, he knew that the only thing that would grant him this power is the immeasurable strength sealed within Pandora's box. But this was no simple task, as the box had been sealed on the back of the Titan, Kronos. But as he looked into finding the box, he would learn that his former protege was also after it for a similar reason. Kratos, still on the warpath, was seeked out by the gods to become their champion so that he could defeat Ares and bring an end to his madness. But as the Spartan fought his way to the box, he would be impaled by Ares, who took glory in Kratos' hard and heavy lifting. With the box now in his possession, it seemed like Olympus's fate was all but sealed. That is, until Kratos rose again. Having escaped the underworld, Kratos would challenge Ares and open up Pandora's box, absorbing its incredible and immense power and evening out the playing field. The two colossal warriors would fight and bring each other to their knees, but Kratos' will proved to have been too much for Ares to handle, so the god of war would attempt to break him in another way, mentally. Once Ares tapped into Kratos' psyche, he forced the Spartan to kill fake versions of himself before eventually bearing witness to the death of his family once again. But in the end, all this did was really pissed Kratos off, so the Spartan would grab the blade of the gods and thrust it through Ares. And this actually marks the official death of Ares in the God of War series, and Kratos' ascension to godhood. However, that's not to say this is actually the end of him, because he is mentioned and sometimes seen 3 times after this point. When we go back to the God of War tie-in comics, we learn that a cult known as the Disciple of Ares wished to revive the fallen god with the ambrosia of Asclepius, but Kratos, having always known the location of the ambrosia, would immediately set out to destroy all remaining drops of this cure-all. The next time is during God of War 2, where Kratos is at odds with Olympus, and whilst attempting to change the past, tangles with the Sisters of Fate. Here, they attempt to alter history by having him die at the hands of Ares, but as expected, the efforts are fruitless, as they are defeated by the Ghost of Sparta. The official and very last time we see Ares is during God of War 3, where he can be seen laid to rest in a vault of glass at the base of the Mount of Olympus. So whilst gone, Ares is actually a very prominent figure in the series, both alive and dead. The legacy that he lays out for Kratos is certainly something very interesting. Kratos himself embodied everything that Ares was looking for, and whilst they hated each other in life, it seems like Kratos became more like him in death. As cliche as the saying goes, we aren't so different, you and I, is something really embodied by these two characters, as they are very similar in many different ways. The one thing that Ares didn't expect is that he would be killed by the person he'd been looking for this entire time. That would bring on the end of Olympus. Ares may have been a stepping stone in the grand scheme of things, but he was one of the many individuals that set Kratos on the warpath against Olympus. So in a way, Ares always achieved his goal. I just don't think he quite expected to do it when he was dead. But for now guys, that has been it for the history of Ares. I really hope you guys have enjoyed this one, as well as the God of War content overall. I know it's something fairly new to the channel, and it isn't strictly fighting game related, but I wanted to do something new and that was kind of refreshing for me. I'm very passionate about not only fighting games, but games I enjoy as a whole. The rich lore of the God of War universe is honestly beautiful. I love the twisted take on the already existing established lore and mythology, and how it kind of threads and weaves in and out of each other. Now, with that said, the next God of War video I do have planned is the story behind the Leviathan axe, and whether or not I believe it's Mjolnir's equal or superior. We're going to explore that in next week's video. But until then guys, that's basically been everything that I wanted to say here. Quick reminder that we also have 2 other History of God of War episodes focused on Kratos and Baldur. I will have a link for them down in the description below, so please do check that out when you get the chance. But now, before this video wraps up guys, let's try getting this video to about 500 likes, and please do not forget to tick that bell and subscribe, as it's a fantastic way of keeping up to date with everything I have. So as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I will see you all next time.